We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
Europe is doomed, we're told. High migration, low birth rates, low levels of innovation, incompetent politicians, and high energy prices are leading to deindustrialization, social unrest, and political instability. Nowhere is this narrative more prominent than in Europe's erstwhile powerhouse and bastion of political maturity, Germany. But Anglosphere reporting of Europe has never been great, so what's really happening? Can we expect a slow death, political shocks, or a shocking recovery? To discuss this today, we have Philipp Mattheis, a German journalist and author. Philipp has more than 20 years' experience as a journalist for Wirtschaft Worker based in Germany and as a foreign correspondent in East Asia, China, and Turkey. The author of several books, from novels to investigative non-fiction, there are few better people to discuss the decline of Europe. Philipp, welcome to Multipolarity.
Very nice to meet you. I'm a big fan of your podcast and feel very honored and excited to be here. I hope I can help out with my on-the-ground wisdom from Germany.
Germany's been on a certain track now with as the lead economic force in Europe. Obviously, it was the economic force, and Paris was supposed to be the diplomatic and sort of military force. There was a kind of a consistent plan around that. A lot of politicians kind of stitched that framework together. And within Germany itself, my understanding, at least as an outsider, is that the national pride was sunk into the fact that it was a manufacturing and economic giant. So maybe you can give us a brief history, however you think you should start, whatever you think is relevant, and explain to us how we got here, at least.
Okay, so I'll make a very quick overview of the German history. You know that in Western Germany, at least after the Second World War, the industry boomed and it became one of the most successful economic nations in the world. And you can still see that, funnily, with the gold reserves. You know, before the end of the gold standard, Germany gathered a lot of gold. They still have I think the third or fourth largest gold reserves, because the exports were so successful and so huge that and back then it was basically paid in gold until 1971. So it gives you a kind of an idea of how rich and how successful German industry was. And that basically lasted until 1989, until the Wende came, when the Berlin Wall came down. And then, of course, it was a huge burden for Western Germany to overtake the East, because it took a lot of infrastructure investment and dismantling the old communist or socialist factories and everything. So it was Germany's a Kraftakt. So it took a lot of power, energy, and especially money to do that. And that definitely worked, I would say. I think now if you drive or travel through Eastern Germany, you don't see a difference anymore when it comes to infrastructure or something like that. And then basically then Germany or German industry needed new markets, and they got this with the European Union, and they got it with China. And I think this lasted. It's interesting to define a point when things really got downhill and led to the point where we are now. But I would say when think back on the years of Merkel. I mean, a lot of mistakes were done by Merkel, but now with hindsight, you would say okay, this was kind of a golden age, you know. So she was ruling from 2003 to 2021. I think she was the longest chancellor in the history of the Bundesrepublik. And this was basically a very lucky and successful time for Germany, you know, because the industry was exporting a lot into the European Union, but also to China. Everything was kind of booming, I would say. Right? I mean, there were problems, of course, but like in general, GDP went up and the wealth was somehow shared fairly, and the trade unions were happy, and the political system started to have some cracks around 2012, 13. There was a euro crisis with Greece, and that's actually also the birth, the point when the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, became a party. They started as a anti-euro party, basically as a sound money party, right? And then they were overtaken by more right-wing extreme people, and then I think later on a second change became, they're about to become like a People's Party again, right? We can just discuss this later, how this happened and how founded this is. But nowadays, like in many Bundesländer, they have a majority, especially in the East. And so I would say like 2011 was a turning point when the AfD was founded. Another big turning point was the Flüchtlingskrise in 2015 when Merkel opened the borders and let about 300,000 people in. And but I think like the biggest turning point was, I think, very recently. It was when the Green Party became to power and started to push their Energiewende or their economic reforms through the agenda. And of course, then it was the Ukraine war, with basically cut off Germany from cheap energy. And I would say like these are the most important stepping point or stepping stones. And we can like dive into detail later, but like I think this would be like the timeline. And what we're seeing now is like the first result of these maybe ill-guided policies, right? So like the seed was planted during Merkel regime, during Merkel rule, and everything was like exacerbated or became really into effect when the Green Party got into power, I would say.
So Philipp, I look back and I really see that, as you say, there was a golden era under Merkel. And I'm less certain that was, from an outsider's perspective, I'm less certain that was due to any great statesmanship or brilliant policy from Angela Merkel herself, so much as some of the things that had happened before her reign, just after the turn of the millennium. So at the turn of the millennium, you had the introduction of the euro and the eurozone, which meant that the euro itself was valued at a lower level than the Deutschmark would have, which gave German industry a competitive advantage. It was essentially like, some sort of de facto currency manipulation from the German perspective. You also had the Hartz labor reforms under Gerhard Schröder, which really helped kind of screw down on labor costs and make German labor more competitive. The single market was introduced earlier, of course, but that also gave Germany a larger and seamless marketplace. And of course, you had the rise of China and its almost insatiable demand for German products, most famously Volkswagens, BMWs, and Mercedes. But also some of their, fantastic engineered products, whether that be railway locomotives or other kind of, turbines or any of the other things that companies like Siemens produce. Core to this, of course, was another step taken by Schröder, which I guess could be seen as a kind of extension of the Ostpolitik that went on under Willy Brandt in the 1970s. But essentially, it was to draw closer to Russia, first of all, as a potential marketplace for German goods. Of course, Russia is the largest consumer marketplace in Europe, but also as a source for inexpensive raw materials, specifically energy, which, of course, was literally the fuel of the German industrial success story. So, you had all of these things that happened, before Merkel. Of course, Nord Stream finally came online, under Merkel. But all of these things took place before Merkel, and she kind of reaped the stability and the success there. But What is it that's caused, like, what in your view is it that's caused Germany to move away from these successful policies? You know, i.e. move away from cheap energy from Russia, move away from trade with China, move away to a certain degree from their kind of industrial model. You know, what's caused this from a policy perspective? Because to the outside, it's like, this is so good, why change it? In fact, you would surely want to protect it for all you were worth.
Absolutely, and I can tell you that a lot of Germans are also like scratching their head, like, how did it happen and why? And it's very hard to find like an overall answer, but like I think a lot of like mosaic stones where they finally coming together now. I give you one example. For example, like the dismantling of the nuclear plants, which was like which Merkel wanted to do after the reactor disaster in Fukushima, right? And this is something that the Green Party always wanted, but this dates back to the 80s. You know, in the 80s there was like a big fear of nuclear escalation between US and Soviet Union, and of course Germany would have been the battlefield. So there was like a big, how to say, like even fear, not only fear, but like a big. Huge people just did not want to have nuclear power. They were like very scared of everything that's nuclear. And this is like a founding stone of the Green Party, right? So when Merkel after Fukushima said like, okay, we're gonna get out of nuclear power, like the Green people from the Green parties, the Green voters were applauding. So the center party of Merkel already moved closer to the Green Party. There was like a big important thing which kind of like explains the energy mess we're in now, right? Because now, like, I mean, you maybe could have managed the green transition without nuclear power, but then you need gas, and Russian gas usually, because the cheapest. We don't have this anymore. So this I think is like one current that explains it, right? The other one. I mean, I don't want to like dive too deep into the German psyche, but like, for example, I'm 45 years old, and when I was in 99, 2000, I was backpacking through Southeast Asia and Latin America, and wherever I met people, I know, like, I was like kind of embarrassed to say I'm German because of the past, because of the Second World War, and also like even some reactions were, especially from English people or also Israelis, you're German, have you really changed? You did a lot of bad things back then, right? So this was still like, it was a topic, and a lot of Germans, like especially in the West, they feel like kind of like guilt-laden with this. They felt like guilty because of what happened in the Second World War. So whenever they see a chance to prove to the world that we have changed, we're the good guys now, you know, they take this chance and they jump on it, and without like much considering. You could see this very good, like when the refugees crisis in 2015 happened. You know, there was a lot of Germans like cheering. So like, hey, we are the good guys now. We're not xenophobic anymore. We're not discriminating anymore. We say welcome refugees, come in, which is like a nice humanitarian gesture. But people who ask the questions like, maybe not the right people are coming in. Maybe I'm pro-immigration, but maybe we should choose better who's coming in. They were like easily or quickly framed as, you're right wing, you may be AfD, you may be even Nazi. So like this, like opposition was like shut down very, very quickly. So this is one thing, and then I think it also comes together with like the energy transition, which of course a lot of like companies for Siemens, they see big opportunities and big ways to make money with the energy transition. But I think it's also a little bit like, hey, we want to be the green guys now. We don't want to pollute the environment anymore. We have our technology, and we just make the world a better place. And I think this is something that is still it's a bit absurd, because like this is in a way it's like a trait of German mentality that has been there for the last 150 years, and which was perverted sometimes in history. Yeah. So like this mission to think like, okay, everybody has to do it like us, and then the world's gonna be a nice place. And I think you can see kind of these traits again with like the movement, and it explains why this energy transition was or still is pretty popular among the population. So no one is really thinking that, okay, can this really work out? So like, no, we're gonna do it. It's gonna be great, and Germany and the world gonna be a green and beautiful place. And whenever you ask questions or wherever you doubt, so like, hey, listen, maybe we need some fossil fuels. Maybe they're not that bad. You're easily framed as someone as like, I don't know, is paid by the fossil fuel industry, or is a right winger, or I don't know, is a AfDler. And this took interesting turns, because now the AfD and the BSW, the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, they're just addressing these people. And they're like, yeah, if you ask questions, if you're skeptical, come to us. We're the right party for you. And indeed, more and more people are asking the question, is this going the right way? So this doesn't explain everything, but like I hope I could give you some little mosaics or little currents that work in the German psyche, and they at some point they shape politics as well.
Yeah, so I mean that's pretty noticeable to an outsider as well. I've seen in conservative circles recently the kind of German guilt aspect is being, relitigated in a sense, not because the past didn't happen, but because it is becoming actively destructive. I think a lot of people are starting to see that now. Also, it always lays out what happened in the interwar years, which was actually pretty nasty on the part of the Allies. But without relitigating history, one of the other aspects, though, that you'd notice about what you might call the German psyche, and we don't want to go full Freud on it, I don't think, but, to get a sense of the mindset, I think, is all right. My sense of it was always exactly what you said. Like, German tourists on holidays were slightly bashful about being German tourists on holidays, and Germans put up with English people saying, implying that they're going to invade everybody if given half the chance. But at the same time, and I think it feeds into the second thing you said, there was still an innate sense of purpose, which I think is very deeply rooted in German culture. I'm quite familiar with German culture. It's deeply rooted in German Romantic philosophy and so on. But that, to my mind, I understand what you're saying, that it's now gone toward this green thing, and that's probably been a long time coming. Maybe we can talk about that more shortly. But what it was always married to, I mean, we're similar age, and what it was always married to up until very recently, if you're an outsider, was the economic miracle. The Germans that you'd meet, at least from an outsider's perspective, would be shameful about the past, but very proud about the hyper-competency, engineering prowess, the fact that they were the workshop of Europe. They saw themselves as kind of the ones that saved in Europe. No moral judgments on this, just the ones, we could go into whether it was true or not, but the ones that saved in Europe, the ones that had all the manufacturing, it was totally fair game. They were more competent than the lazy people in the South. I don't want to be mean about it, but that was kind of the view. Now, look, again, we don't need to relitigate the sovereign debt crisis era. We don't. But what's so bizarre to me is that, I thought I understood that, and now they're chucking their industry down the toilet. So, have the German people just abandoned that vision in favor of what you're talking about, like a green wonderland? Or are they sort of being told, don't worry, you're not deindustrializing, there's a plan here?
Oh, I would say it's both, but definitely, we have to talk maybe a little bit more about the Green Party. I think Green Party had two currents. One is openly pro-degrowth. I think if you read Ulrike Herrmann's book about degrowth, she actually takes example of the British war economy during the Second World War, where everything was a bit rationalized, and she's saying basically the economy was actually great. Everybody had what he needed to, and she takes this as an example where we should get to. So okay, we all have to degrowth. It's only possible with deindustrialization and degrowth, and so basically, we all have to go back to the living standards of the 70s, which were not that bad, she says. So it's actually a hilarious, absurd book, but it's a bestseller, and a lot of people love it, and a lot of people think. I would say why? Maybe, I don't know, because they lack of a simple understanding of basic economics. I don't know, but it's popular. It's really popular. So this is one thing, but like, what was people told? I mean, this is more, would say like maybe, I don't know, 10, 15% maybe sympathize with this view, just like consume less and make everything green and eat organic food and farm it yourself, whatever. But like what the economy minister, like Robert Habeck, was telling the people was that like, no, we gonna have a green Wirtschaftswunder. So like we gonna like transform the whole industry. We're gonna produce green steel. Every house gets a heat pump. And the automotive companies or the car companies going to produce electric vehicles. So everybody will, and basically was promising, hey, this is going to be a huge boost for the German companies. It's going to be a green Wirtschaftswunder. And I think I like the term energy blindness a lot, where I think many people are kind of energy blind. They don't have an idea of how important energy is to produce things. And I think energy is just there, and you just have to harvest it and take the sun and instead of Putin's gas, and we don't have any problems. This was maybe the biggest misunderstanding, that now the bill is coming with people saying, okay, like if you want to have that, then everything just gonna get much more expensive. We lose a lot of competitiveness, and at the end we lose a lot of jobs. And I think you could see it very well with the German car companies, where, I mean, of course, it was also like decided in Brussels at the end that in 2035 there should be no combustion engine cars produced in Germany. But of course, like there were also many car companies, especially Volkswagen, where said like, okay, let's do this. Like we are great. We're just going to produce electric vehicles now. It's going to be amazing. And no one, I mean, it was easy to see. You could just read China 2025, where they laid out a plan of how they want to dominate the whole supply chain of electric vehicles, from the raw materials to the batteries to the rare earths and everything. You know, so like you could see like, hey, if you're gonna do this, then at least we need to have a plan, right? And China is already there where we want to be. Like they control already the complete supply chain of battery metals, for example, right? But so it was a bit like blind, and yeah, and then you have this like scary tendency in Germany, which is, I would say, increasing, that whenever somebody is asking questions or is skeptical, it gets easily framed as a right winger, right? So people like, I would say like, I mean, in private conversations, a lot of people say like, oh, I'm not sure if this is going to work out. But like publicly, everyone was saying, of course, it's going to work. Yeah. And yeah, it turned out in a kind of tragic way now. I think like now this month we're getting the bill, you know, see like companies closing down
And so just to push on that a little more to understand it. So I think I understand that there's a kind of hardcore green group. I think we have them in most Western societies. It sounds like they have a disproportionate influence over the German mindset because of some of the aspects you've talked about, as an idealism covering up a wound, etc. But what about the people who do understand it? I mean, it could, because ultimately we can discuss electric vehicles and the green Jetsons utopia or whatever. Obviously, we don't find it as realistic as some people do. Electric vehicles have proved themselves fine. They're here to stay, I think. We'll see how long. You know, there might be issues with depreciation, but they're so cheap now that the depreciation factor probably doesn't matter, at least at Chinese prices. So they're here, but that doesn't mean that, you know, we stop burning fossil fuels or anything. That's fantastic. That's a classic case of taking a piece of technology that's a shiny object at the time and projecting it, like when they thought we'd have flying cars in 1960 or something like that. So, okay, I get that group, and that's like a portion of the population, whatever you want to say, 20%, 15%, and they have disproportionate moral sway in Germany. But as you say, there are people who are like, this might not work out. And ultimately, the issue here, as we always highlight in the podcast, and as I'm sure you know, isn't really about the green transition itself. It's about the fact that even if you are producing the EVs, if your electricity prices are too high, your EVs aren't going to be competitive. And that's why Germany is deindustrializing, and that is worse for more energy intensive sectors like chemicals and so on, which are huge in Germany and have been huge in Germany for 150 years. Many of the chemical processes we use in the world today were invented in Germany in the early 20th century. So I guess what I'm asking is, let's not put a percentage on it. Well, you can if you want, but what sort of a cohort in German society understands that fundamental problem? That it's not really about green versus non-green. It's about, will your industry be competitive? And are those people cowed? Are they like, is that impolite to say, because of the Russian gas being cut off, we can't afford, our industry's going to collapse? And has that become kind of like verboten as well?
Whenever you say something about Russia, I think it has become verboten. Yes. I think you cannot say publicly we are like fucking up our industry because we're not taking Russian gas anymore. I think you get like outcast very easily. I think there are a lot of people who, of course, a lot of like great businessmen and really smart people who understand what's going on, but how to say that? I think some of them like definitely shared the dream of the green transition. I think for example, if you take like a company like Siemens, I think it's not even a pipe dream for them. I mean, they're building the electric infrastructure, right? They're building the electricity networks and everything. I mean, for them, it's great business, right? Car companies, it's a difficult thing. Whenever you get a little bit closer, you see like cracks in the dogma. For example, BMW was always producing combustion engines like on the side. They were saying, "Hey, we got big electric," but like they still had their plans were still like producing combustion engines, and they also were still like innovating and doing research on them. But they were criticized for that. And now it's like the first time where people said, like, hey, actually, the BMW strategy was a bit smarter than the one of Volkswagen, right? So they kept their options. And I think to understand it a little bit, we have to talk briefly about the German election system as well, the political system, because it's like a parliamentary system. So it means that you always have to build coalitions. And that means that the Green Party, I would say, like disproportionately big influence in German politics than they would have otherwise, right? They're like kind of like they're very good at like shaping the mainstream opinion or shaping the narrative, and and then I think a lot of people were more like, I don't know, center-right or center-left businessmen. They just jumped on the train. And I think it's going to be very interesting what's going to happen the next month. Because like now you see the election results in some of the Eastern Bundesländer where the AfD is also the strongest party now. And now it's like obvious for almost everyone that this green project is not going to work like they thought it's going to work. I mean, of course, some of these people, like Habeck, I think is kind of like scary. Last speech I've heard of him, he was basically doubling down. He just said like, no, we should not change course now. It's going to be very, very dangerous if we give out the wrong signal to the population. Like we have to stay course now. It's now even more important to stay course, right? So this is if, for me, I would say that's kind of like ideological tendencies this person is sharing. And then it's also interesting now that like by the old Volksparteien, the big parties, the CDU and the SPD, they don't have a profile anymore. It's like this SPD, no one, I mean, it's old socialist or at least like workers' party, like they completely lost their profile. There's no one who's like a factory worker. Why should he work for SPD? Why should he vote for SPD? It's like this party is nothing like what it used to be. And the percentage in the elections, I don't know, 15% if they're lucky. I mean, Gerhard Schröder got like more than 40%, right? So it's really a shadow of what it used to be. And then like everybody who has doubts, or let's put it like this. I mean, like there are four big topics that were important, not only in German society, most of the West. It was like the refugee crisis, or immigration problem. The second one is climate. The third one was the corona policies. And the fourth one is the war in Ukraine, right? And if you disagree with the mainstream narrative on one of them, you basically out. You basically end up with AfD or BSV, right? So there's this, and this I think is a big failure also of the old parties, that they like I don't know, they made the corridor for opinions so small that left and right people were basically dropping out or were kicked out. You know, they maybe if you ask many of them, if you ask someone if who was not or didn't disagree with the corona policies, or doesn't disagree now with when it comes to Ukraine, right? Mostly they don't want to leave the mainstream, right? But they say like, hey, I'm kicked out. Like they say like, hey, I have an extreme position now. And so the people who are, coming back to your question, I think the people who are making the decisions or in the business world, it has become a very small corridor of people. And I would say in this corridor, the Green Party, the Green narrative is quite powerful still. It's maybe the most powerful narrative. Yeah.
So on the matter of, I suppose, bringing together the last few questions and your last few answers into kind of one question about German strategy. I mean, there are some of us who feel that German guilt about the past and also German political conformity, that very narrow Overton window that you described having been formed, has actually made the world a worse place. I think that if in some time, at any time really between 2014 and the end of 2021, there had been a Germany which was willing to be assertive on the foreign stage, it had more than enough power to force through some kind of implementation of the Minsk agreements that would have placated Russia. And they were doing a great enough volume of business, which was hugely profitable for Russia, with Russia, to kind of cajole the Russians into that. And if the Germans had been assertive enough, if Germany had been assertive enough to defend its national interests, if it had said, no, we can't have a war in our backyard that involves the main supplier of energy to Germany and the guarantor of German security, namely the United States. We can't have that kind of war in our backyard. We're not going to permit this. It's in our interest to kind of clamp down on this.
Which Schröder did in 2003. So it is possible, right? Schröder did it.
Well, can you explain that process? Like, what did Schröder do, and how did it work out, and why didn't it happen this time? Like, why did Germany allow the Americans to drive the car on Eastern Europe?
Well, I think Schröder had a lucky window in history, because Russia was not seen as such a threat back then by the US, and Iraq was far away. Let's open up the big thing. Like I'm fascinated by Brzezinski doctrine, right? Which is saying basically that it's an American interest to avoid a kind of alliance or a soft alliance between German industry, the Russian raw materials, and the Chinese population and Chinese market. And I think in 2003, this was not a threat for the US, like, because Russia was not seen as it was seen as a loser of the Cold War and not as a strong opponent. China was also, I don't know, back then maybe 10th largest economy in the world, definitely not the second largest. And also I think it was a bit of mentality, right? And it was still like the world is growing together and Europe is growing together, and somehow like peace was in the air, right? So I think he had a kind of like lucky window of history to allow Germany to say no. And I think this window wasn't there anymore in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. I mean, theoretically, of course, I wish Germany would have taken another course, and I wish Germany maybe would have, I don't know, get a new profile as a peacemaker or whatever, right? So if I say this publicly in Germany, like a lot of people would jump on my throat and say, like, "Hey, are you AfD or are you BSW or something?" Right? So I'm basically leaving the mainstream with like saying something like this, which is absurd. But yeah, I would say, I mean, not try to avoid to get into conspiracy theories, but yeah, like my feeling is, I think many people have the feeling that U.S. influence has grown, is somehow dictating the German foreign policy as well. I mean, I don't know, like you probably read it in the news that like last week a German frigate was crossing the Taiwan Strait. Beijing was upset, of course. I mean, from a law perspective, they were right, of course. It's international waters. Okay, why not go through it? But then again, it's like, what the hell does a German warship has to do in the Pacific, right? And why do you want to provoke China? I mean, it's one of your largest trading partners. So, what's in there for Germany to do that, to provoke China? It's nothing in it for Germany. Still, they do it. And yeah, I mean, you can make many theories why the German policy is so now so close to the US camp.
So, I mean, moving, on this subject to kind of get down to the very basics, the very basics of what is German grand strategy. What I see as having been German grand strategy traditionally is that since unification in the second half of the 19th century, Germany has, always required markets for its goods. It's always been a tremendous producer of goods, especially after the Second Industrial Revolution. So it's always needed open markets for these goods, and it's also needed a tremendous amount of raw materials to kind of to fuel this production. And traditionally, so I guess in the modern sense, it's in the German interest to maintain the European Union single market, which does provide that seamless marketplace for manufactured goods. It also makes sense, eminent sense, for Germany to keep open those fast-growing areas of the world in Southeast Asia, like China and Vietnam and Singapore, and all of those potential marketplaces. But it also especially makes sense for Germany to build close ties and try very hard to build very close ties with Russia. First of all, because, as I said earlier, the Russian Federation is the single largest consumer marketplace in Europe, and also, of course, it's a global natural resources superpower. It has literally everything that Germany could possibly want. And it can, metals, food, gas, oil, even things like gold and various industrial metals like nickel. I mean, it's a kind of it's a bounteous place as far as Germany's concerned. And then, of course, as I say, you also have that market. So, is there any sense that it seems clear, and I think the polling and the election results show that the German people think it's clear as well, that the mainstream parties have gone down the wrong route. Is there any sense that the BSW, the Sarah Wagenknecht, and the AfD will be able to influence German politics to the extent where Germany might look to refocus on its traditional foreign policy aims, especially given it seems that in the next decade or so, the US will start shifting attention towards China by necessity and thus away from Europe?
It's a good point. I mean, first, I think you have to acknowledge that neither the AfD nor the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht have a good economic plan or economic policy. I mean, Sarah Wagenknecht, she's a fascinating person. She's intellectually really bright. She's she has one of the highest reputations of all politicians in the German population. So she's really impressive. But at the end, she's a socialist, right? So she doesn't have like a really smart or a contemporary, I would say, contemporary economic policy plan, and neither has the AfD. The AfD is at the end a xenophobic party and not really open for trade. I think this is like an open flank of these parties, because they none of the really big companies would endorse them in any way, right? So they're really, at the moment, they're really the party of the not really the lower class, a lot of middle class people as well, and probably also in the upper class, a lot of unhappy and frustrated people who give their vote to these parties. But I think they don't have the power or the knowledge yet to really get the big companies on their side. So this would, I think it would be a long way for them. But having said this, I think of course they're going to shape the German policy a lot, because now if you get a little bit closer to the German Bundesland, if you say Thüringen, for example, the AfD is the strongest party, so they have the right to build a coalition. The second strongest party is the CDU. But they said, we're not going to form a coalition with the AfD. And the BSW does not want to do a coalition with the AfD neither. So basically, it's like a pet situation. So they're not able to form a government. And it's probably going to be like this for quite a long time. And Brandenburg, I think this weekend are elections in Brandenburg, and it's going to be similar. It's going to be very, very hard to form any kind of government. And at the end, it takes. But if you go now on the Bundespolitik, elections are next year. None of the old parties, the Altparteien, has the guts to, I would say, change the course on the four big topics I mentioned before, which is climate, is immigration, is Corona, and is Ukraine war. So they're basically all in line, and I don't see a solution for that at the moment. I think my feeling is more that the politics, or maybe you can call it the elite, gonna try to rule with a minority government against the majority of the people, and I think this is on the horizon now, and I think they're gonna try this as long as it's possible, and I think it's just gonna increase the division and the discontent and the discomfort of the people with the government. This is what you see now, and I think there are a lot of situations everybody, I think, had it now in Germany, where you sit down with friends and have a few beers or wine, and then suddenly people are saying things they would never say publicly. Let's say immigration is a little bit different thing. I think this is the first big topic where you see a policy change, where it's it's becoming kind of a consensus that Merkel immigration policy is absolutely outdated and something needs to be done. But you don't see it with the other three topics. And I don't know, at the moment I don't see any tendency in one of the old parties to give any ground to these things, and I think it's gonna go on. They have this what they call Brandmauer, which means firewall, where they say no one of the so-called democratic parties is gonna form a coalition with the AfD, and that means there will be a lot of pat situations in many Bundesländern with the government, and a lot of people are like, what's this? Especially in the East, where people are kind of more sensitive, or I don't know, maybe you can call it naive in a way, but they said hey, we went to the streets 30 years ago to bring down an anti-democratic system, and we thought we have democracy now. What you're doing this is not democratic, right? You just we voted for the majority voted for a party, and you're not gonna let them build a government, and I think this frustration is just it's going to increase.
Just to push back on that a little bit, as far as I understand, the CDU, which is Angela Merkel's old party, the Christian Democrats, the kind of centre, the traditional, European centre-right party. It's still doing okay in the polls. The feeling that I get from my admittedly ignorant view of German politics is that the CDU next year is most likely to be the largest single party for the federal elections. And it's likely to be able to form a government. And in addition to that, I have seen Scholz and really start since the elections in I think Brandenburg and Saxony were the two that were, or Thuringia. Since then, he has started talking a little bit more tough on immigration. That there have been some deportations back to Afghanistan. There's talk about giving Afghanistan migrants money to migrate, to repatriate back to Afghanistan. And I wonder whether that would be even easier for the CDU to do, and whether there's any possibility perhaps that AfD will certainly be locked out of any coalitions next time, but will it really be the minority ruling against the majority? Is it really going to be that bad?
I don't know if this is going to be the case in the Bund. If you do like the overall German polls are a little bit more benign, I would say, to the big parties. But like if you watch like the elections in this Bundesländer, it's sometimes very bad. And then one thing with like immigration policy, I would say it's more like a bit of a lip service, because the immigration policy is a mess, but it's a mess on a European level, and there is no way Germany can change the immigration laws just by itself. You can close the borders again, but nobody really wants that, because there's also like a lot of economic damage for the people who are commuting from other countries to work in Germany, and to hold up the whole EU immigration system, the Dublin II treaty and everything. This is going to be it's a piece of work. So I don't see big changes coming there. And then with the CDU, of course, at the end the differences are minor. There will be some pushbacks, I think, on the green agenda. I think probably the combustion engine verbot will fall 2035. They will be probably able to produce combustion vehicles longer. But when it comes to Ukraine, the CDU is so Merz is it's even more hardline, right? They are the ones who are basically opting. Always like, let's deliver more weapons. Let's have no negotiations with Russia. And so I don't see a big change on the horizon. No, it's hard to say for me. And also, if you check the polls, like on the country level, like the votes are so small that they will have to form like a very big coalition again, which like waters down everything, So it probably will be CDU, SPD, like a grand coalition, which Merkel had, and probably they need a third party as well, which will be the Greens, for example. So you basically will get the same again, and not a big change. And I think this just drives more and more people to the extreme parties, if you want to call them like this.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Even if the CDU could pick up votes by kind of faking it, it'll just make people even more angry, because then they'll have to lie, because they won't be able to carry through. Okay, from a broader perspective, at the beginning of the war, when some of the crazy stuff started to happen, the economic stuff, sanctions, all this kind of thing, within about a week or two, I was kind of immediately thinking that we were reliving The Economic Consequences of Peace by John Maynard Keynes. So I don't know if people are familiar with that book. It's the one that actually made Keynes famous. It's not a work of economic theory. It was a commentary on the Treaty of Versailles and the subsequent, what he thought would be the subsequent outcomes of the Treaty of Versailles. And he got it pretty much right. It collapsed Germany, and that ended in chaos. I think I alluded to this earlier. The Germans are very inclined to think a lot about what happened in World War II, and less inclined to think about what led to it, which was probably the Treaty of Versailles. Anyway, not to get off onto a historical tangent, the problem with the Treaty of Versailles caused was effectively Weimar era Germany. It destroyed the country, collapsed into hyperinflation. And I think my fear from the beginning of the Ukraine war and the return to this basically zero-sum economic thinking of geopolitics or economics in geopolitical terms. You punch me, I punch you, and eventually someone gets knocked out and then you win and you get a medal. That's not how the economy works. If you start punching each other, everyone goes poor. That's basically the lesson of the Treaty of the Economic Consequences of Peace. So I guess I'm not the only one, I don't think, that's concerned that if Germany keeps going down this path, it's going to end in a very miserable place. It probably won't be the hyperinflation of the 1920s, but people have higher expectations now than they did in the 1920s. People were very poor in the 1920s relative to living standards today. And a fairly decent hit to living standards and high unemployment in Germany and poor jobs, bad jobs that don't earn that much money and don't support the local and regional economy could really, really anger people. I think that, to me, is one of the biggest concerns, because that could prove very politically destabilizing. So I guess I'd ask two things. One of them's an easy question, and the other one's a very difficult question, but see what you can do with it. The first one is, at least when I was studying in university 15 years ago, or however long ago it was, I'm not saying that everybody read the Economic Consequences of Peace. I don't think they did, but I think the lesson was learned. And I think the way that it was basically taught to people was the Marshall Plan was good. And that kind of gave people a sense that fixing even your old enemy is a good idea, because then everyone's prosperous and friends and no chaos occurs. And to my mind, 15 years ago, that was just conventional wisdom. In history classes, in everything, like liberals taught it, conservatives taught it, like it was completely uncontroversial. So I've been shocked. One of the things I've been shocked about in the past 2 years is the people have unlearned that lesson in such a short period of time. And that was, to my mind, that was a very deep cultural learning experience. It's been very frustrating. So the first thing I'd say is, how has that played out in Germany? Because I'm sure you guys have the same history about the Marshall Plan and the work together stuff. And then the second question, much more difficult, but see what you can do with it. How bad do you think it could get if people's living standards get cut to shreds in Europe, and especially in Germany, and there is this political instability? I don't expect that we'll get the rise of the National Socialists again, but do you have any sense of like where that could go? Like, it just feels to me that people voting for the AfD or Sarah Wagenknecht's party is just, that's only a beginning. Like, people aren't poor yet. The industry hasn't disappeared yet. Give this 10 years. Like, where can we go? So there you go. And a relatively normal question and a crystal ball question that everybody loves to hate.
Well, I start with the second one. I don't know if one of you had like taken a train recently in Germany, because like, I mean, the German trains, they used to be famous for being on time, right, and having a good service, and now this has become such a mess. Like,
by the way, I took a train from to Cologne 10, 15 years ago, and I was, as a British person, awed by the quality of the service. Just everything, like what it was like in Cologne railway station, the trains themselves, how inexpensive they were, how fast they were, how clean they were, like every single thing for me was just fantastical, and it made me a little bit jealous.
The German system has become such a mess now. It's really incredible. Like you always have a delay. I mean, statistically, I think 60% of the trains now are delayed, and some of them have like delay. Last time I was traveling from Düsseldorf to Munich, and it had like a 4-hour delay. And even if you don't have a delay, then I don't know, the aircon isn't working, or I don't know, the stuff is not there. The board bistro, the board restaurant is closed for whatever reason. And it really has become like tremendously dysfunctional, and you have the impression that it's actually like exponentially. It's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. It's going down like faster and faster. It gets worse and worse and worse. And actually, this is the case, because like the system was like running okay with like some minor problems for a while, but there was like no investment into the tracks, and now like this is like basically compounding, and it's getting down in a tremendous speed, and like everybody's feeling it, of course, because everybody's taking a train once in a while. You see, like, well, it's just really dysfunctional. Switzerland, for example, did stop letting German trains crossing the border now because like they're messing up their timetable in Switzerland. Because they're always late and creating chaos. So they said like no German trains anymore. Like people now, if you go to Switzerland, you have to exit the train on the border, wait for a bus, and then cross the border and then go into a Swiss train. It's really bad. And statistics say, I think you need like 30 to 40 billion. I don't nail me down on the number, but like a high amount of like billions investment. And if you do this now, then the train system would be working or functional again around 2027. Problem is like there are no 30 billions. I mean, Germany like sent 30 billions to Ukraine. It's a bit of an elephant in the room. Like everybody's like kind of feeling, it's like, well, wait, we spend a lot of money to Ukraine, right? So, but and our train system is messed up. Maybe we could have invested that, but it's not like you don't read about, you don't get this calculation in the media. You don't read, like, just people like feel it or think about it in their everyday life. So this is like one very obvious thing where German people see now that something is really not okay in this country. And then, of course, another like ticking time bombs, nothing new, is the pension system. I mean, Germans are getting too old. The pension system is basically underfunded. This is one reason why we have immigration, but like also, like you said in your podcast, it turns out that like people we let in, they're not contributing so much money to the pension system, but like more like costing money to the government. So coming back to your question, like I don't see like a big catastrophe like happening in the next 2 or 3 years, because it's still like kind of a rich country, especially like the south of Germany is like there's a lot of like old wealth, and also the cities are kind of rich. So I think there's a big cushion there that people will use in the next years. I would also say that like people have to get used to inflation in the upper single digits. I know, something between 5 and 15%. And but I don't know. At the end, like, I mean, some people would call it the propaganda system is working very well. I'm not sure about this. I mean, I work in mainstream media, and I can assure there's not like really a propaganda department that is telling people what to think and what to read. But in a way, like, most people are pretty complacent still. I mean, in the East it's different. It's more for historical reasons, because they have a history of like rebelling against the state, right, and distrusting the state because of the communist regime they were living in. But in Germany, like, people are still like very staatsgläubig, so they are quite sure that the government is doing the right thing, and let's let them do the thing. We think it's gonna be okay. And I think until this belief has worn off, it will take a couple of years. There's still some fuel in the tank to like keep everything kind of okay. But I'm pretty sure that like the living standards in the next years will like decline big time. And the first question about like, do people still think that like economy is a win-win game and not a zero-sum game, or do you think a Marshall Plan is a good thing?
I suppose I mean the educated class. You know, if you went to university, that's the broad picture you were given. We made a mistake after World War I by thinking of things in a zero-sum game and punishing the loser.
You know what they think of? They think of like, if there's peace, if Russia is defeated, and so we can rebuild Ukraine, and this is going to be like a big profit and a huge win for German industry. That's what some people say. But no one is. I never heard anyone in the educated class like just having a mind game of like what actually would happen if Russia wins, or how would it look like if Russia somehow makes a win in this war. I don't think that people are thinking about this. I mean, probably in the big companies, they have their own departments who like do their strategic games, but like you don't read anything about this in the press. Like it's just like, okay, once the war is over, we're going to rebuild Ukraine, and everybody, like, we're all going to get a little bit richer.
I mean, is there any hope? I mean, we on the podcast often kind of joke about our how filled with doom we are about Europe, especially. But without cheap pipeline Russian gas, without the Chinese market, which seems to be getting ever farther away, there seems to be ever more friction between Europe and China, and that obviously involves Germany. With high levels of migration, whether that's an economic positive or not, it creates a certain degree of social strain always and everywhere. With the fact that there is going to come soon the bill to stabilize and rebuild Ukraine, no matter what anybody says about that being all done by the private sector, it won't be. And no matter what anybody says about Ukraine being able to get back on its own feet, it won't be able to, and it will need to be stabilized, unless you want a kind of a super poor or even failed state on the border. That's going to come soon. You need huge amounts of investment in infrastructure, not just the rail, as far the railway system, as far as I understand, but in other areas of infrastructure as well. But industry is grinding slowly into dust. It's not a sudden deindustrialization, but it's clearly happening. I mean, where's the hope? Like, is there any hope for Germany's future? Do you think it's possible to arrest some of these trends before they become irreversible?
Maybe two things. Like, maybe I want to end up with a kind of positive anecdote, but to make it short, I think it has to get worse until it can get better. And I think we just seeing, like, right now people are realizing that, hey, what was promised to us 2 or 3 years ago is not going to work out. So I think this will take some time until the politics or the companies will change course. But like to end with I don't want to end now, but like with a positive anecdote. I recently was visiting a German company, a mid-sized company, and it's like the backbone of the German economy, like small, quite often family-owned companies that nobody knows, and it's a company owned in 6th generation, like somewhere in Bavaria, and they're building for electricity systems. They built like little switches to stabilize the power. Sorry, like it's a really like a very detailed thing, but it's like basically in every electricity system you need these little switches, right? And they're the market leader with it, and they're supplying 50% of the world with these little things, like out of a small town in Bavaria. And of course, they at the moment they have no problems at all, because everybody is like the whole world is trying to electrify everything, and they said like we're like doubling our revenue in the next year. And I think this is something quite underlooked, and also it's getting damaged right now, but still, like there's something I would say beneath the surface that many people who don't know German economy maybe don't see. There's like thousands of mid-sized companies with like very smart engineers who basically don't care much about politics. They just like try to do business, and I think this is kind of like that can be the anchor that maybe saves their German economy.